Hello everyone, and welcome to this audio podcast synopses. This is an audio podcast synopses in and around the sort of anticipated audio podcast series in and around the role of in and around the role of endogenous opioids in Ischaemic Pre-Conditioning or IPC in humans. This is an audio podcast with the Shientist and part of the LabZtorm effect v.3. This is a Storm Lobostic soliloquy and another Storm Lobostics production. In this audio podcast in this audio podcast series and in this sort of synopses, I'm going to provide some basis or an outline on this works. So a little bit of context in part of this sort of synopses. So timely reperfusion of ischemic tissue is a prerequisite to improve outcomes of cardiovascular disease. Cardiovascular disease or coronary heart disease, but paradoxically, reperfusion causes injury to tissues as well. The concept is referred to as ischemic reperfusion or IR injury. Studies or investigations or research studies or investigations in around ischemia reperfusion or IR injury have been thriving to better understand sort of IR injury and develop novel treatments to sort of minimize minimize aspects in align to ischemia or coronary heart disease or cardiovascular disease. And this aligned to this, one such approach has been referred to as ischemic or ischemic preconditioning or IPC, which generally entails sort of brief periods of alternating ischemia and reperfusion before a prolonged period of index or what's been referred to as indexed ischemia. Aligned to this as well, endogenous opioid peptides or EOPs are thought to play have been thought to play a sort of role in and around IPC. And so, using in research that had taken place in and around 2008, in around 2008 2009, in at least some aspects, using a human forum model of ischemic reperfusion injury or IR injury. Research took place to assess the effect of non-selective opioid receptor antagonists. So, for example, naloxone on protection by IPC. In addition, around this the research that had taken place retrospectively. In addition, plasma concentrations of endogenous opioid endogenous opioid, and specifically beta endorphin. Beta endorphin was assessed during IPC stimulus. In and around this as well, in and around this, the role of opioid receptor blockade, naloxone, in ischemic preconditioning or IPC on healthy human volunteers had been established or identified, and in line to this, a procedure referred to as flow-mediated dilatation or FMD of the brachial artery was measured by ultrasound, had been measured by use of the ultrasound to determine endothelial IR injury. At the same time, using enzyme linked immunosorbent assay or ELISA was implemented in context of laboratory of a laboratory assay, was implemented in context of a laboratory assay to quantify, to help quantify or determine beta endorphin, and to establish whether it has a local effect to induce protection during IR injury. Venous blood samples were collected from healthy volunteers during an IPC stimulus. Now, in line to this, some of this initial background or context provided. This audio podcast series will look at the sort of the role the role of endogenous opioids in ischemic preconditioning or IPC in humans, and seek to highlight a sort of more in and around the introduction aspects in and around ischemia and vascular injury, aspects in and around irreversible vascular injury and reperfusion, aspects aligned to ischemic reperfusion or IR injury, ischemic preconditioning or IPC. Some aspects aligned to remote ischemic preconditioning or RIPC, and some aspects aligned to ischemic post-conditioning or POC. Then some aspects in around the mechanisms, if you like, in around IPC, IPC and RIPC, and also mechanisms of transfer of protection by RIPC. Some aspects in around the endogenous opioid peptides in RIPC. Some aspects in around beta endorphin in context of in and around its basis around an endogenous opioid, and some aspects in around the beta endorphin assay that had been implemented. Some aspects around the a basis, if you like, in and around human, using a human forearm model to sort of implement a sort of a model of IR injury in human volunteers. Some aspects in around the measurement of IR induced endothelial function as well, and then this audio podcast series will have a sort of summary in around IPC and RIPC, and also in line to this sort of audio podcast series, I thought it would be only right as well. Although this audio podcast took place, I'm sorry, this research the research in and around this sort of retrospectively took place in around 2008, 2009 in and at the University College in London, UCL in London. Again, the original works had been sort of had sort of been undocumented. There had been some depth of sort of research in around the literature in around the works. However, at the same time, in around this audio podcast series, owing to the basis of looking at Ischaemic preconditioning as an entity in itself. I thought here would be a good sort of opportunity to sort of remember George Floyd, who was murdered in May 2020, in context of how his carotid artery and in around his carotid artery and his in and around his brachial plexus had been construed owing to how he had been murdered. And so also and so again, I thought this would be an opportunity to sort of remember George Floyd in that context, and also to highlight that the research this research had no connection, obviously, to George Floyd, no direct connection to George Floyd in any way, but just to highlight that the audio podcast is or the series will look at aspects in and around sort of the sort of aspects in and around sort of the physiology aspects, physiology aspects in context of pathology, and also in and around sort of the sort of research aspects, since Ischaemic preconditioning, or Ischaemic preconditioning, and Ischaemia reperfusion injury, or IR injury, have a similar sort of basis to the unfortunate circumstances that George Floyd had witnessed, in so much that IR injury is implemented through a sort of inhibition around blood flow, blood flow inhibition, and in the same way or similar way that George Floyd had his carotid sinus and brachial plexus inhibited as well, in context of physiology. So this audio podcast series will sort of look to sort of remember George Floyd from a physiology perspective. So this was once again a sort of audio podcast series, audio podcast synopsis in around the anticipated series around the role of endogenous opioids in ischemic preconditioning or IPC in humans. And once again, this is another Storm Robotics production, and it's a Storm Robotics production aligned to the audio podcast series, the LabZtorm Effect v.3. Thank you.